is he going to ask who the boss is?
Like, how does it work? You know what I mean?
Because you're right, because the host of the show is kind of unofficially the producer's supervisor in most places.
Am I the interim boss for these 3 hours and then it goes back to you?
You know what? If it's important to you, if it's important enough to you, I will let you feel like you are the boss.
Okay, I see what you did there.
For these 3 hours.
You're going to let me feel like I'm the boss. You're going to let me feel like I'm the boss, but not actually be the boss. It's the illusion of control that we are all so familiar with in marriage.
Only if it's important enough to you. If you don't care that much, then
okay.
We don't have to do that for you.
I see what I've done is I have set myself up for another. It's like the exact same relationship I have with my wife.
I care enough about you that I will let you have what you feel like you need for 3 hours, 3 days a week.
This is literally just being a married man. That's what this is. Just like, I'm going to give you the illusion of control, but all the decisions are actually going to be made by me.
Yeah, now we both have like a pit in our stomach, as both of us are happily married men.
What has my life become? I have no control. You know, it's funny. My wife came home. I was obviously in Saudi for Thanksgiving, and my wife took advantage of a bunch of the Black Friday sales.
You were asking if they would give some money for Utah, right? That's why you were in.
That's why I was
Saudi.
there. That's
you
why
were
I was
doing
there.
A Trevor Riley.
I was like, hey, do you guys have any extra money for the University of Utah NIL fund? And they're like, where is Utah? What are you talking about? No, my wife took advantage of some of the Black Friday sales and got me like a bunch of clothes. And I was like, well, yeah, thank you. These are all great, but this is like the last place in my life that I'm allowed to make my own decisions, my wardrobe. And now you're just dressing me like I'm a doll. And she had a good laugh about it and patted me on the back and said, okay, you're going to wear them, though. And she's right.
You're going to wear them.
She's right.
Here's the thing with me when it comes to feeling like I'm being dressed by my wife in similar situations. I am not confident about my fashion choices left to my own devices, so I'm like, go for it. Most of the time, like, whatever you choose is probably better than what I would choose, other than the great graphic tees that I buy, and the jerseys. Like, I know that I would choose better in those things, but everything else, I'm like, yeah, you go ahead and dress me.
Anyway, we're here to talk about sports, not our wardrobes or the shopping habits of our significant others. Look, there's a bunch of stuff developing around Utah football. I have to admit, I'm growing probably more impatient than most of you are with the lack of transparency, no announcements coming out. I thought that based on what I was hearing yesterday, I thought that we were going to get an offensive coordinator hire announced yesterday, probably during Spence's show. I really did anticipate that. It has not yet come to fruition. And now I'm hearing a couple of different voices, a couple of different options as maybe, negotiations are hitting a standstill with certain candidates. You have to keep your options open. And that's the right way to handle it, but it's not for lack of urgency. It's not for lack of trying. It's just these are complicated situations. And by the way, the assistant coaching carousel is this time of year equally complicated to the head coaching carousel because there's still games to be played. This is conference championship game weekend, and obviously some teams are going to continue on to bowl games. If you're moving from a group of 5 level up to a power 4 level, the assumption is, well, you'll just drop everything and you'll jump on board with the new job and try to get this new recruiting class signed. The timing of it has been really awkward because this early signing period, which is the de facto main signing period now, which is happening today as Utah brings in recruits in a full class, these people are committing somewhat blindly to the University of Utah. And not just Utah, to Michigan. Michigan announced yesterday that they're looking for an offensive coordinator. How much that complicates the situation for Utah, I don't know. Michigan is a different job. Michigan is a different deal. Michigan is a different pay scale for the most part than Utah is, even though they took care of Andy Ludwig so incredibly well. Michigan is more likely going to be hunting for guys who are, mid to low level Power 4 coordinators rather than only Group of 5 coordinators. And look, maybe Utah is also looking for some of those. But Michigan might not be hunting the same candidates as Utah. If they are, now it gets a lot more convoluted because we saw what happened when you were chasing the same guy that the University of Oklahoma was chasing. James, what buttons are you pushing back there?
Apologies. Something was wrong, so I was trying to fix it here on the board, so I apologize if it's going in and out.
Okay.
Can you hear it now?
No, I don't hear myself. Although hearing myself is probably not that important because people don't even want to hear my voice. Not even I want to hear my voice. All right. Back to the point, though. Michigan, look, Mac Leftwich, I think, had emerged as the most likely candidate for Utah to bring home. And if now Mac Leftwich and his agent are in contact with the University of Michigan, that becomes a little bit more difficult. I don't know if Michigan's interested. I haven't heard anything to that end. I just thought that we were going to get an announcement that he would be hired yesterday, and it hasn't happened. And he's not the only guy that these conversations are happening with. So forgive the redundancy, as this is how I started the show on Monday and how I started the show on Tuesday, but we need a bleeping offensive coordinator to be hired. I will say I'm encouraged by the results on the recruiting trail offensively, even without that. Because in this era of college football, it would be very, very easy for guys to just be like, I don't know, man. I don't even know who I'm going to be playing for over there. The consistency of Morgan Scalley and Kyle Whittingham saying, come here, we'll take care of you, we'll develop you, we'll find ways to make you successful, is still ringing true to some extent. I think it's also important that you're getting the subtweets from guys who are on the roster right now, from guys who are the important players that you're hoping to bring back. Spencer Fano, first and foremost among them. We asked that question. Your response was, you got to bring back Fano. He is one of the best young players on this team. He's one of the best players on the team, period. You pay attention to the Pro Football Focus grades. Like, he was the highest graded offensive lineman in the West. So that's a guy you need to retain. And you saw the tweet from him, run it back, a bunch of pictures of himself and his team. I mean, that's not the same as saying I am fully committed forever to the University of Utah, but it's something that you put out there that I think quiets concerns and affirms the commitment. So as Utah's trying to evaluate who the offensive coordinator is going to be, try to get these negotiations across the finish line, and still keep one eye on the other options, you're also trying to figure out who the quarterback is going to be next year, what the quarterback room is going to be like next year. A couple of freshmen have announced their commitments. We talked about Jamarian Ficklin, the guy who's coming from previously a commitment to Texas State, a couple other interesting individuals who have signed at that quarterback position to that end. You're hopefully improving your quarterback room, but there's still not the big albatross announcement of, all right, this is the experienced player who you're now bringing in. And I put a poll question out, as I like to do, about the recently available Noah Fifita and whether or not Utah should take a run at him. Keep in mind, when I say take a run at this player, I'm talking about $1 million being committed to someone who's a starting caliber offensive weapon at the quarterback position. That's the minimum that we are hearing on the recruiting trail in the transfer portal situation about guys who are established starters or who you think have the talent to be day one starters. You're committing $1 million. I asked the same question about Miller Moss, the guy who left USC. I'm asking it about Noah Fifita. I could do another poll of and now portal again. Are you willing to commit at least $1 million of Utah football's NIL/revenue sharing funds to a quarterback who has some family ties to the university, and Noah Fifita does? By the way, I confused him yesterday when we were talking in Crosstalk. I was attributing a bunch of the things to Noah Fifita that were actually true of Jaden DeLaura. And, of course, Jaden DeLaura and Noah Fifita are not the same human. So, my mistake there. I had attached Noah Fifita, his name, to Jaden DeLaura's traits, and that was obviously a mistake. Fifita was one of the guys who came out of Servite High School and committed to Jed Fish and came up through that system, decided not to follow Jed Fish to Seattle. I wonder if that's an available option to him now. If Jed Fish is like, hey, remember how we had a ton of success together a year ago? And he didn't have as much success under Brent Brennan, who I think is a very good coach, but maybe just, wasn't the same kind of fit. Do you want to come to Seattle now, Noah Fifita? You're only a sophomore. Your junior and senior years could be here in Seattle. Like, is that who you're recruiting against? Are you now up against Jed Fish? Or as he said, look, I gave you the opportunity to come with me once, and you said no, so I'm moving on to bigger and better things. The numbers for Noah Fifita in 2023, 2,869 yards on 72% completion, 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. A great year. And one of the many reasons that I told you all preseason long that Arizona was a formidable test and a big problem for Utah. That was true. They were a big problem for Utah. They weren't as big of a problem for the rest of the Big 12
Just about
conference.
anyone else.
So
yeah.
I was only half right on how threatening Arizona was.
I thought that they were going to present themselves to be a much bigger problem for up, and then they just laid an egg at home.
They did a lot
places.
of that this year.
Yeah.
Anyway. I don't know what happened, but Noah Fifita has decided, all right, despite my solidarity and my commitment to Arizona, even when the head coach who recruited me out of high school left, I now have decided there are greener pastures somewhere. Maybe are they in Salt Lake City? We'll find out how sincere the recruiting efforts of him in the transfer portal, which officially does not open for a couple more days.
Are you feeling like going to Seattle and returning to the team that Jed Fish coaches in Washington is more realistic than him coming to Utah?
I think that is more realistic, but I truly don't know how interested Jed Fish is on that front. Right? I mean,
it would make sense that Fifita would be interested for sure. It would also make sense that Jed Fish would be interested too, but I'm with you. Maybe Jed's saying, you know what, I've moved on because I tried already with you. And
I don't Jed Fish, what little I know of Jed Fish, I don't believe that would be his stance. But you have to allow for the idea that, look, I mean, if a relationship is good while you're together and you're working together, and then one half of that relationship says, no, I've decided that you're not the right fit for me, it's kind of like breakups in romantic relationships, right? Like, do you want to get back together with the person who rejected you once?
There's a reason why it doesn't happen very often. And when it does, it doesn't last very long.
And Jed Fish, it doesn't strike me as a super petty guy. So maybe he's just like, dude, the results are all I care about, and we were good together.
Yeah.
Let's run this back, and let's do it in Seattle. We have opportunity here. We have money here. Everything you had at Arizona, you have plus some.
Yeah, even more so
at
in
Washington,
Seattle.
Right?
And I wonder also if it makes a difference in Jed Fish being more willing to take Noah Fifita back, if you will, in that Fifita's from Arizona, right? Servite High School is in the state of Arizona, so or is it not?
Southern California.
Southern California. My bad. Apologies. It completely nullifies my point. I thought they was an Arizona guy. Anyway, I was going to say maybe he goes, well, I understand you want to stay in your home state, but that's not the case.
Right, no, but hey, look, Southern California.
Not that far from Phoenix, so there's
closer at the very least, right? And again, there's all these things that you have to consider with whether or not Utah can be in the running for a player like this if a team like Washington is in the running for a player like this. Because Will Rogers was a starting quarterback at Washington this year. Will Rogers, a senior. Will Rogers is done. Washington has done a pretty good job with their recruiting. Washington, under Jed Fish, continues to do a good job recruiting. And he is not shy about playing young quarterbacks. There might be somebody, and I'm not deeply familiar with Jed Fish's 2025 signing class. There might be somebody that Jed Fish is higher on than he is on Noah Fifita. Noah Fifita comes with the baggage of having, now the rough season. After a really, really strong season, having the rough season that he just had at the University of Arizona. It was not his best year. Now, production-wise, he put up a bunch of yards, 2,900 yards, 2,958, but it was 60% completion, 18 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. And if you're Jed Fish, you might look at that and just be like, wow, what happened there? If you're Utah and whoever the offensive coordinator is, if you're Kyle Whittingham, you're looking at it and you're going, well, that's better than we had this year.
Yeah.
It's not a great year by Noah Fifita's previous standard, but that's better than what we got, and it's actually yardage-wise better than what Washington was able to achieve. And, I think Noah Fifita is probably having some serious conversations about moving to Seattle. Can you interrupt that? Can you come in? Can you swoop in with an appealing enough offer both on the schematic front and on the financial front? And maybe the better question, can you make the case that Utah, even coming off a rough season, is better equipped to compete for a conference championship and therefore a college football playoff spot next year than Washington is? And I think that is an obvious yes.
I think that's a compelling argument because you can, even though you would think logically you'd want to play in a better conference, right? If you're a top-level competitor or a perceivably better conference, you would think that it would be a compelling argument to say, listen, you don't have to play Oregon. You don't have to play Ohio State. You don't have to play Michigan and Penn State in this conference. You play your former team, Arizona, who you got to think is not going to be as good without you. You have to play good teams like ASU and BYU and others, but those are not at the level of the good teams in the Big Ten. So I would think that would be a compelling argument, like, hey, you have a better chance to win a conference championship at Utah than you would at Washington.
Okay, I try to put my poll questions up before we start the show, James. What you were just saying puts me on a different thought pattern, and I have a new question.
Okay.
All right? Fill in the blank for me, James, and fill in the blank for me out there, all of you people listening, 877-353-0700. Utah is a blank away from winning a Big 12 championship in 2025.
I love it. Match game style. Blank.
Are they a quarterback away? Were they a quarterback away this year? I think the answer to that question is yes.
Yeah.
Were they a quarterback away in 2024 from being at least an 8-win team? Absolutely yes. From being a conference championship contender? I think probably so.
Let's say from being what BYU was this year. BYU, a 10-win team, just by tiebreakers missed the conference championship game. Like, being at least in that ballpark.
If Cam Rising had stayed healthy all year, the conversation is completely different. If Cam Rising's backup was Arch Manning, then you're having a completely different conversation. So is Utah a quarterback away? Are they a quarterback and an offensive coordinator away? I will be revisionist history guy all day long, James. If Cam Rising is healthy in that conversation you're having, at the very least, talking about the tiebreaker situation. At the very least,
I agree.
With how good the defense was, even in awful scenarios. So if Utah is a quarterback away, and now because of what happened with Andy Ludwig, they are a quarterback and an offensive coordinator away. But what they really are is a quarterback away. Is Noah Fifita an answer that could make you a conference championship contender? absolutely he is. And guess what? That's more likely at Utah than at Washington. The ground that Utah has to make up in the Big 12 that's a shorter gap than what Washington has to make up in the Big 10 right now. Because Washington, and I love that campus, I love that city, I love Jed Fish. I think Washington is going to be great. I do. But you're going against Dan Lanning in every recruiting battle, regionally and now on the conference level. And you have to play some combination of Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, and Oregon every single year. And then teams like Indiana sneak up out of nowhere.
Well,
and Wisconsin's going to be good again at some point.
USC is going to be good again at some point.
Yeah, maybe.
You got to figure they're gonna be good again at some point.
I don't know, James. I'm not ready to put that out there.
Iowa's gonna be
Iowa
and Wisconsin kind of the same ballpark. They're gonna be good again.
Find a way to be like, hey, guess what, Washington? We're gonna have a game against you, and it's gonna be 7-5. And everyone's going to think it's the 1920s. And guess what? We're going to win.
They're going to think it was the World Series final score at the end of October.
So, look, you brought up the point, like, hey, if you're Noah Fifita, you probably want to compete in one of the best conferences. I can attest to this, all right? I won $1 million being a bigger fish in a smaller pond. And there are ways that you can really work that to your advantage. And unfortunately, it's undeniable that the Big 12 conference right now is the smaller pond than the Big 10. You can be a bigger fish in this smaller pond, put up great numbers, and guess who will still call your name on draft day? The NFL.
Yeah.
Shedeur Sanders is not going to suffer for having played at the University of Colorado at all. Travis Hunter is not going to suffer for having played at the University of Colorado at all. Josh Allen didn't suffer from playing at the University of Wyoming. That is one thing you can rely on. The NFL will find you if you're talented. So you don't necessarily have to think about that if you're Noah Fifita. Now, he probably is because, like you said, when you're in that phase of your life, you're wired a little bit differently. You have these incredibly high hopes and you have this irrational confidence, like, well, I could go to Washington and I could be Michael Penix Jr. and look what happened there. He was able to do this and that, and we could be a national championship team. Okay. Or you could chase those same goals, but just have the 12 weeks that lead up to that goal be a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And maybe not as lucrative. And that's where the whole new world, the whole new environment of name, image, and likeness makes this picture more convoluted because Washington has more money than Utah does. And by the way, that's not a knock on Utah. Washington's got more money than BYU does, at least for their football program. More money than Utah does. More money than I think every Big 12 team, with the exception of Colorado right now because of what Dion and that factor, like the Coach Prime factor, has done there. But Washington is bringing in a different level of television revenue. Doesn't translate directly in NIL, obviously. But these are the things that every player, we're using Noah Fifita as the example. You can replace his name with Cade McNamara. You can replace his name with Cam Rising, replace his name with Miller Moss, with John Mateer, whatever you want to do. Every quarterback who's going to be getting phone calls and is getting phone calls right now has to weigh all of this into their mind. And by the way, John Mateer, who's like number one on everyone's list, the worst thing he can do for himself is go play at, I don't know, like Tennessee. The worst thing he could do is go find himself. Tennessee's a bad example because they already have a pretty good young-ish quarterback. The worst thing he could do was go find himself on an Ohio State roster unless they're overpaying, unless he's making way more money there, because he is blowing out the competition at Washington State. He is significantly better than all the guys that he has to compete against. And just like we see the games.
No, but seriously, like Pop-Tart's fun. If you win the game, you get to eat a giant Pop-Tart.
And it's in Orlando,
mascot.
right?
Yeah, I think so.
So, yeah, you got like, Harry Potter World. You got a little Disney adventure.
and you got beach close by, Florida, but it's not Hawaii.
It's not.
Like, if you have a chance to go to Hawaii for free, go to Hawaii for free.
Gosh.
Right?
I would, if I was a coach, I would be trying to perform at the exact level where I was going to the Hawaii Bowl every year. I would probably get fired for that, but I would be
7-5.
I'd be like,
let's go,
guys. We need 7-5. Coach, we're capable of 10 wins this year. 7-5, and don't get smart. All right.
I've already made reservations in Honolulu.
I want to eat at Goofy's Cafe. All right. I need to go pick up some hula shorts for the Christmas theme.
Get some giant shaved ice. Let's go.
Oof. Now I want to go to Hawaii. Reminder, as you're thinking about the beautiful weather of Hawaii, and you're probably feeling the cold drafts of Salt Lake City, Utah in December, might be time to check out how energy efficient those windows are. Right now, Advanced Window Products is running their biggest discounts of the season. Maybe you don't feel like your windows are in any kind of bad shape. Maybe you feel like they're great. Might as well check it out. It's totally non-committal to get on the schedule and have someone come out, measure the windows, give you a quote. 10 windows or more, and they're going to give you the biggest discounts of the year. You can lock in a price now and do the window replacement in the spring. You can trust them because we trust them. Nate Orchard, Jake Weber, they've been running this company for a few years, and they've taken it to the next level. They're continuing to serve the lifetime warranties that existed long before they took over the company. The integrity is there. It's all locally done. Call them today. 801-850-9100. Tell them OC sent you. Get on the schedule with Advanced Windows, or go to check them out at advancedwindows.com. Even if you don't need new windows, maybe you just need new blinds, you need new shutters. They can take care of that stuff for you as well. 801-850-9100. Zachariah Hour begins next on the Sean O'Connell Show. ESPN 700, 92.1 FM.
Hey, Zachariah. All right, we'll get started here in about a minute.
The controversy, the question will be for the last 2 minutes at the moment. It may not be a point at the end. What do you think about what the committee said up with this?
Well, a couple of things that jumped out. Number one, if I were SMU, I feel really good. Regardless of what happens in the title game, I think we're going to feel really good. As far as Alabama over Miami, I think that's going to be a slippery slope as these playoffs continue to develop, because you have a team in one of the Power Four conferences that has the least amount of losses when it comes to these two teams. Miami is 10-2, Alabama is 9-3. And so to put Alabama in over Miami right now, I think that's one of those things, man, we better be careful as far as that's concerned when these schedules are unbalanced.
Welcome to hour number 3 of the Sean O'Connell Show, ESPN 700. The start of hour number 3, my guy Zachariah swings by every Wednesday for the full hour. That sound was part of ESPN's college football ranking show. Of course, last night, Booger McFarland breaking it down as Alabama right now looking like they're in a very good spot. Miami seems to be likely on the outside looking in. Conference championship games left to play out. Big 12 looking like it is only a one-bid league. Plenty of stuff in the NFL, NBA, and everywhere to talk about as we still wait on signing day for an announcement about an offensive coordinator hire, about Kyle Whittingham's long-term decision. Although, the more I think about that, the more likely I think it is that no news is news, that no indication, nothing being officially announced means that the status quo is maintained, that Kyle Whittingham doesn't feel a need because he's just keeping the job that he's had for 20 years. He doesn't feel a need to sit down in front of a microphone or in front of a camera and say, hey, guys, even though it was well publicized that I was thinking about maybe doing something else, I decided I'm staying. It just feels like maybe the status quo is where we're going with this. I won't be surprised if a decision comes down later, but at the moment, I think Kyle Whittingham is your head coach for the foreseeable future. Now, what does that mean for Morgan Scalley? What does that mean for the offensive coordinator hire? We talked about it many, many times. Kyle Whittingham talked about it. He wanted it to be a collaborative effort, all of that stuff. But how possible is that really? Do they have the same vision for it? What's the obstacle right now? We know that Ben Arbuckle was a target. You weren't able to get that one across the finish line because, Oklahoma. Okay, fine. But everything I'm hearing is that Mac Leftwich is next in line, and we haven't seen Mac Leftwich's name associated with, like, the new Michigan opening. We haven't seen Mac Leftwich's name associated with anything bigger and better. So what's taking so long? Is it going to be Leftwich? Zachariah, we had some technical difficulties, but he's here now. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the show.
What's popping? Yeah, you know what I did? I'm trying to get this off the ground, OC. I'm trying to use Eberflus as a noun. So what happened is the technology kind of Eberflused out on us, or I Eberflused the connection. You know what I'm saying?
So you're trying to use Eberflus as a verb.
I'm trying to use Eberflus for anything that's bad. OC, it takes a lot now that we're in our place for me to be shocked by something that happens in sports. I mean, sure, it happens every once in a while, but like, you know me, it's very rare for me to be out of words or not to have any words to say, and for my jaw just to be dropped and me to be silent. I could not believe what I was watching. It was like the slowest car accident I've ever seen. That was so, I mean, they should have fired him before he even got to the locker room. If I was the owner, I would have sprinted down from the owner's box and gave him his pink slip before he got to the locker room.
The Eberflus mismanagement of a number 1 overall pick, I think, is really what ends up being the final nail in his coffin. And that's NFL football for you, right? There's this formula that the successful teams seem to follow pretty closely, and then some teams think they're more clever. Some teams and coaches think that they have it figured out in a way that, like, Andy Reid doesn't. And no matter what, the owners come down with the power or they exercise the power of controlling a roster in a GM situation and a head coaching situation. And you would think that it would just be as simple as, let's just figure out how Andy Reid made this work. Let's just figure out how the Detroit Lions have been on the rise, and let's try and follow that model. But it seems like nobody's able to actually simplify it to that level.
Look, there's a lot that goes into it. I think with Reid and Mahomes, you obviously have a combination of a genius quarterback and a genius head coach and play caller. It's tough to get that. You don't throw the word genius around really lightly, but certainly in this instance, I think eventually you will see that Caleb Williams is a genius quarterback. He just very clearly, and he's on his 3rd offensive coordinator now already, and he's a rookie. I mean, clearly they have not put genius coaching around him, and none of it more evident than Turkey Day. OC, I'm sitting there going like, what are you doing? My 10-year-old nephew was saying, what are you doing? He's 10 years old. Everybody, and he just by the way, he looks like Jeff Daniels, by the way. Dumb and Dumber, shout out to that great movie. But that's what he looked like on the sideline. He looked like, not Lloyd, Harry was Lloyd Daniels in Dumb and Dumber. He looked like Harry on the sideline, like he didn't realize he was coaching an NFL game.
I want to get back to the Utah side of this coaching question and the coaching situation that is happening. But you're right. We see examples of incompetence at the NFL level, and that's the highest level with all the money and all that kind of thing. And the fact that these incredibly competitive jobs are held by people who, when it all plays out, seem like they're underqualified or unqualified is one of the most maddening things that you can observe as a sports fan. But I do want to circle it back and pick your brain a little bit about what's going on with Utah right now. They're trying to sign a class of high school recruits. The transfer portal window opens in a matter of days, not weeks now, but days from now. The transfer portal will officially be open, and you're going to have to figure out who you're offering, who you're trying to get to come from, wherever they were to come play for you. And the quarterback position and that room has to be figured out. You need to add depth and talent in the running back room as well. There's big questions for Utah football, and all of these questions they're attempting to answer while also waiting for an answer on who the head coach is going to be, whether or not Kyle Whittingham is going to come back. Now, I've decided today that I need to stop holding my breath to wait, and that no news is just an indication that he doesn't intend to move on, at least at this point. And that means that Morgan Scalley stays as the head coach in waiting. But the recruits and the coaches trying to get these guys to commit are wondering, well, how long is he going to be here? And more importantly, on the offensive side of the ball, who's going to be calling the bleeping plays when I do go to the University of Utah? That is a question that needs to be answered. It needed to be answered yesterday. It needed to be answered Monday. It needs to be answered today at the very latest, and we still don't have an answer on that. How problematic is that for Utah in your mind?
Yeah, well, I was listening to your show from yesterday today because I couldn't get today's show today because it's not uploaded yet, obviously. Anyways, I heard you say, and they need to decide that today. And I'm like, well, wasn't decided yesterday. So, look, I don't know why they're dragging their feet. What would keep them? I don't know what goes into the decision process, but certainly, first of all, Utah is that 2 of their 4-star recruits are both linebackers. I was just like, that is so Utah. But yeah, obviously, if you're a quarterback or you're on, any position on the offensive side of the board, you're going to be looking to who's calling the plays, especially because the way that it's such a defense, it's already such a program that's known for its defense, and it's the offensive coordinators. The defense, like, I'm sure the linebackers had no problem because between Scally and Coach Witt, they know they're going to be fine one way or the other. But the offensive side, yeah, you're going to be like, well, first of all, it's known for being a defensive school, even though they had some great offensive numbers in the years when Cam was balling. But it's already known as a defensive school, and they haven't named an offensive coordinator. So, yeah, you would think that it would be something that they would have the kind of urgency that you had, where you're saying Monday. If not Monday, it definitely had to be Tuesday. If not Tuesday, it's got to be today. And now it's gotten you to the point where you're tired of even waiting or hoping to get an announcement. But certainly that's going to weigh on, a Money Parks or a Dorian Singer or whatever. You need to know who's going to be calling the plays. And, if it's a quarterback, you need to know who's being called the plays. If you're the other positions, you need to know who the offensive coordinator is going to be. And then also you're probably going to factor in who the quarterback's going to be.
As long as we're talking about quarterbacks, they were able to sign 2 quarterbacks today to the class so far. One of those guys was Jamarian Ficklin, who – Jamarian, I'm not trying to reduce your incredible high school career to a predictor for what's happening at the offensive coordinator position, but I'm reducing it, at least today, to that because he was previously committed to Texas State. Now, Texas State and Utah are not usually competing for recruits. One of these schools is a Power 4 school. The other is not. One of these schools is kind of a regional power. The other has made themselves into a national brand, although they've been beneath that standard this year. Jamarian Ficklin was committed to play for Mac Leftwich, who is the offensive coordinator at Texas State. And he still signed that national letter of intent today. The rumor mill has it that Mac Leftwich is actually in Salt Lake City trying to get a deal done. Should I put credence into the idea that Ficklin today signed on for his future at Utah, knowing that the guy he committed to play for at Texas State is actually going to make that same thing? He's going to do the same thing. He's also going to sign his future to Utah football. Or should I be looking at the fact that this Ficklin kid got an offer to Utah, probably because his coach was linked at least for a minute or two, but he doesn't have any better offers, and the future is far less certain when you're a high school player than when you're a rising offensive coordinator. Am I putting too much weight into the fact that Ficklin still signed his deal today?
Well, you kind of answered my question, or you kind of answered your question while asking it. I think that you could draw those, you could connect those dots if you wanted to, and you could also look at it like this is the only, P4 conference offer that he got. So even though there was a link to it, that even if, Leftwich isn't coming, he'd still come. I mean, he would still go because it's his best offer. So I think you kind of answered your question while asking it. I think you can connect the dots, and maybe that will end up being what happens. Or you could just look at it like he was linked to it, then that created some sort of conversation, and now I've got an offer from there, and that's the best offer that I have.
We'll see how it plays out. Unfortunately, patience is the only answer on this kind of a thing as we hold our breath to figure out what's going to happen with the offensive play calling duties at the University of Utah.
Which neither of us are very good at. OC. Me probably worse than you.
Yeah.
me probably worse than you, but having lived with you for a couple of days, a couple of different times, you don't have much patience either.
I am not a patient person. Anyone who's been around me for any measure of time can attest to the fact. And you know what? I'm not even ashamed for my lack of patience, because patience is a virtue, but you're not supposed to have every virtue. Right? You're supposed to have some. I think I have some. Patience isn't one of them. I actually don't know what virtues I do have, but I know that I don't have patience.
Despite the fact that you made your career in very violent fighting, I would say that you're a very peaceful person.
Is that Is peace one of the virtues? I don't.
So you're trying to maintain your humanity because you don't want to be perfect. You just want to have some virtue.
Thank you. Yes.
Right?
Just some.
You want to be relatable.
I want to be relatable. I don't want people to be like, oh my gosh, this guy, there's no flaws. How am I supposed to even approach him? How can I talk to him? Yes.
Too late. You're already unrelatable.
You're just so perfect.
As the boss of these 3 hours, you're already unrelatable.
Yeah, Zachary, I don't know if you were listening at the beginning of the show. We established that when James is producing the show, the role reverses, and I am now his boss, at least for these 3 hours, instead of him being the
I like that.
over me.
Yeah, I like that. So
only if it's important to him, Zachariah. If it's important to him that he has that, then yes, I will graciously grant that to him.
I like that. He's your boss every other hour, but for those 3 hours, you're the boss. Who's the boss? Shout out Tony Danza. By the way, I usually get some stuff off my chest. So clearly I wanted to get the Eberflus thing. I want to get that off the ground and running. I want that to be a common thing that people say in like 20 years. He Eberflused it. The other thing is, how about some records set over the weekend? First of all, longest run back by a defensive lineman. That was incredible. And then Josh Allen throws a touchdown pass to himself. Somehow that counts as a receiving touchdown and a passing touchdown in fantasy. That blew my mind as well. All right, my chest has been lifted now.
You feel good? You've unburdened yourself of all the things that were burning and had to be talked about?
I mean, OC, those are two things we have. How often, based on how long that the NFL's been around, how often are you going to see things that have never been done before?
No, you're right.
And we saw two.
It's so difficult.
The longest.
It's so difficult now in sports to do something for the very first time because everything's been done. But like you could still put up bigger numbers than other people did, but to be the first one to do something is almost impossible, which is another reason why I think Travis Hunter deserves to win the Heisman Trophy this year.
Agreed.
He's the first one to do it like he's been doing. He's the first guy since football had plastic helmets to actually be putting in this level of work on both sides of the ball. I think he's going to win the Heisman Trophy. I think it's also interesting, and I pointed this out earlier in the week, that the Big 12 is the most disrespected of all the Power 4 conferences, and the Big 12 is going to have the Heisman Trophy winner, and is going to have a guy I think who will be the runner-up for Coach of the Year nationally. Curt Cignetti of Indiana I think is going to win. I think Kenny Dillingham will probably get second place there. So if one of the best coaches and if the best player are in this Big 12 conference, does that mean the conference deserves more respect than the College Football Playoff Committee is giving it?
Oh, man, I don't want to make an unpopular opinion in what should be Pac-12 land. I heard your rant about how you're never going to get over that. Neither am I, and it's so bad that it killed the king of the Conference of Champions, Bill Walton. Probably not directly, but his heart was probably broken. Have you ever seen those stories about birds? OC, there's like this kind of bird where like they mate for life, and then when one mate dies, they usually always die within a week of the other one dying.
Yeah,
I think that's what happened.
I think a swan does that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, that's what I think happened to Bill Walton. But anyways, not to have an unpopular opinion in what should be Pac-12 but is Big 12 land, I think that the Big 12 is properly respected. I mean, from what you saw this year, OC, were you more or less impressed when the two teams that were supposed to be vying for it, one of them went defeated in the conference? Oklahoma State did not win a game, and Utah obviously very much disappointed. So when you look at that, can't you see why teams from other conferences look at the Big 12 and don't have a lot of respect for it? Because I kind of understand it, as unpopular as that opinion probably is over these airwaves right now.
That's fair. Your opinion is valued, even if it's wrong.
Okay.
Everyone needs to know.
You want them to have two teams in?
Everyone needs to know, by the way, as we got to get to a break here, I'm going to try and respect the clock. Nice. Zachariah is going to be filling in for me as I am off for a combined Christmas trip and PFL duties. He's going to be filling in, and he's going to be filling in here in studio. And, James, I really don't want to let him drive my car around town, but we need to get him an Ineos Grenadier because, first of all, he's a tall man. He's much taller than me. He needs the extra leg room. This is a big vehicle, lots of great room in there, especially headroom for all of you tall folks out there. Also, he's never really experienced Utah, and for him to truly experience the snowy roads and the mountains, and maybe he'll take like a 3-hour trip down to some Red Rock, he needs a vehicle capable of that. My Mazda is not capable of this, but an Ineos Grenadier can handle that trip easily. So Warner Ineos Grenadier, that's how I'm going to call, and I'm going to get them to commit to give Zachariah a little drive-around vehicle for a couple of weeks while he's filling in for me. They're out at 2400 South, 5600 West at the Warner Van Center, if you know where that's at. And this is a truly beautiful vehicle that is also over-engineered for the highways, meaning it is capable of anything you want to put it through off-road. You want a home base for your hunting. If you want to be in that camping vehicle that can take you to the farthest reaches of the beautiful national parks here in the state of Utah, look no further than the Warner Ineos Grenadier dealership out there in West Valley. WarnerIneosGrenadier.com. And, of course, as always, tell them that OC sent you. Got to take a quick one here. We'll come back. I'm going to welcome Zachariah into a debate that James and I were having earlier. The greatest role player, your favorite role players, in honor of Paul Millsap retiring from the NBA. Zachariah, I know, has some great opinion on who's a role player and who's not, and he's going to love James's take on Klay Thompson. It's the Sean O'Connell Show, ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. ESPN 700 and the Rocky Mountain Chevy dealers want to invite you to help those at the road home this holiday season with much-needed blankets, blankets, coats, shoes, hats, and gloves. Drop off your donations at any Rocky Mountain Chevy dealer. ESPN700sports.com for more of the dealer locations. Spread the warmth, help others find their way home with the road home and ESPN 700. Sean O'Connell Show, Zachariah joining us for an hour every Wednesday. Talked a little bit about the college football playoff situation. Big 12 is going to be a one-bid league. And it's good to have the perspective of someone who's not biased, like Zachariah is not biased. He doesn't have the same affections for all these Big 12 schools that we do, and his opinion is valued even when he's wrong.
Yeah.
And, James, I want you to feel the same way because we were having a little – just in the hot lunch today, we were talking about Paul Millsap retiring. After 3 years away from the NBA, he's finally announced that he is retiring from NBA basketball, professional basketball. And he was a beloved member of the Utah Jazz, undoubtedly. I put out the question, who's your favorite role player? And you gave me a little pushback. You think that Paul Millsap's more than just a role player. But first, Zachariah, when I say a role player on a team, it could be a football team, baseball team, basketball team. I think role players are easiest to identify in basketball, maybe. What are the criteria for someone to be a role player or not? Or how do you graduate beyond being a role player in the mind of a one-time all-conference junior college hooper?
Thank you very much for the accolade, so I didn't have to do it myself. Look, I was never a role player. I was a superstar. No, that's not true. In high school, I was one of the main features. I was like one of the best players. As I got up to junior college, I was probably closer to a role player. I think it depends on the sport, right? For football, I don't think you can really have a role player unless you're talking about like a slot receiver, like maybe a Wes Welker or a Julian Edelman. I don't know why the Patriots have the monopoly on white wide receivers, but like I can only think of a role player for that, or maybe like a goal line back who doesn't get the majority of but even that's not really a role player because that's a pretty big role having to score a touchdown. I feel like it all pertains back to basketball. I think you can do it in baseball, either like a pinch hitter or a pinch runner or a very specific reliever or something, but I don't really think role player for baseball either. I can think of a million for basketball, and I don't know specifically what your argument was, and I don't know, can you go from being a superstar and being the main focal point of your team like a Chris Bosh? Because Chris Bosh was a role player with the Big Three, and Millsap did have some star years, but then became a role player. Al Horford is a guy that I think about with the Red Sox. I mean, the Red Sox with the Celtics, where I think about, he was like when he was on those Hawks teams, he was the main focal point, but now he's definitely a role player on the Celtics. The main ones that I think of, though, OC, and I hate both teams. I hate both the Lakers and I hate the Spurs. But you got to think about Robert Horry, who won several of his 17,000 rings between the Spurs and the Lakers. And you got to think of let me just answer you this. When you first asked me, the first thing that pops in my head, and it always will for anything that surrounds something like this, Jamal Crawford. He is a bucket and a microwave.
Okay.
I would put in Millsap.
See, I got him like the Dan Marley type. Like you had Kevin Johnson and you had Barkley.
Dan Marley, another guy, a little bit more than a role player. Well, he was an all-star for 2 years.
Yeah.
In those runs.
Gosh, Dan Marley.
Okay.
And an all-NBA defender.
Well, here's the thing. You mentioned Klay Thompson as you teased it into the break, and I would
tell him.
Okay,
tell him.
I think Klay Thompson is one of the most overrated players in the history of the NBA.
Whoa!
I think that he is maybe you can say he's the greatest role player ever, but he is not a star.
Whoa!
I know. I'm probably the only one with that take, but that's what we were teasing going to the break, and OC is laughing his head off right now.
I love it so much. I love it.
I mean, he dropped 37 and a quarter. He was one.
You just
in
mentioned
his prime.
Jamal Crawford. He dropped 15 times? No one's going to say he's a star.
I know, but Klay has like 7, 9, 13, 14, 17, 18, 20 in like points in a quarter. It's not just like a one-off. I would say
Jamal
this.
Crawford,
okay, to give some credence to your argument, first of all, he's not the same player now, but in his prime, because you have to factor in the defense too. There's two sides to the ball.
He was a
Jamal Crawford
great defender
did not
too. Yeah.
Look,
what
it all comes
you should
back
call him
to,
Jamal 4.
Okay,
Yeah.
what it all comes back to is a question asked by me, which James feels.
I just quibbled with details, but I don't.
Paul Millsap, in honor of
Yeah.
his retirement, who's your favorite role player? Because we all love, like, on your favorite team, you love the star guys, but you also love the role players.
Sometimes more than the stars.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You definitely.
Sometimes more. Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, I remember when I loved Charles Oakley more than I loved Patrick Ewing or Derek Mason in some of those games. You know what I mean? There's some guys that you just learn to love because of their contributions, even though they're never a star. Paul Millsap graduated beyond just being a role player at certain points in his career, but I still called him a role player, and James took exception to that. But there's nobody on planet Earth, James, that if I say, who's your favorite role player, is going to say, you know who my favorite role player is? Klay Thompson.
Well, I know that's what makes him the most overrated. One of the most overrated.
It's also okay. I got 3 things. I'll try to be as quick as I can. Number 1, hilarious that James is quibbling with Paul Millsap, but then firmly saying that Klay Thompson is. That's completely ridiculous. Number 2, the reason why you love the reason why you love role players oftentimes more than you love superstars is because you expect nothing out of the role player and love every minute of when they do something good, and you expect everything out of the superstar and get really angry when they do bad. And number 3, I will say this. Sean Marion, my second favorite Phoenix Sun of all time behind Charles Barkley.
The Matrix?
You could say was a role player behind Amari Stoudemire and Steve Nash. Even though I think he was more than that.
Man, come on now.
Okay, well, I'm just saying.
I did not.
Raja Bell was the role player.
Okay, let me ask you this.
Okay, let me just finish my point, and then you can go.
I'm sorry.
Look. Okay, Marion, I would say you could say is a role player because he was behind Amare and Nash. I would say in Utah, for your example, I would have Hornacek as a role player because he was behind Stockton and Malone. In the case of Klay, just to give some credence towards your terrible argument, James, you could say that when KD was there, Klay was the role player. But on the titles that sandwiched the 2 titles that KD got, the one that they got before KD and the one that they got after, he was absolutely not a role player. He was the second best player. Okay, I'm done.
So 2022, he was definitely a role player. There's no argument with that. He was a shell of himself. He had the one 30-point game in the playoffs, which was awesome. He was only pretty good after that. That's the only. Andrew Wiggins was the second best player on that team. You could maybe say Draymond Green. In the first championship, 2015, yes, he was the second best player, but he wasn't he was an all-star on those Warriors teams because he was playing for all-time great teams. The smartest thing he ever did was.
I don't think you're factoring in defense.
I am.
You're not factoring in defense.
Great defenders.
Okay. He locked up their best
are not
player.
necessarily stars all the time.
Great defenders are role players.
They're not always role players, but they're not necessarily stars.
A lot of times they're role players. I love
it. They are when you can shoot like that. James, when you can shoot like that and you're guarding the best player on the other team, you are not a role player.
He's one offensive skill, and he's outstanding at it. That's why I think that he's you could probably say he's the greatest role player of all time.
Okay.
But beyond that, that's my thing. I realize I'm the only one with that take, too, by the way.
But a great place to bring it to the air, and exactly why this was the right time to do it, because I knew Zachariah would have a violent reaction to it. The current Utah Jazz basketball roster and basketball team has 1 star, right? There's not even a bona fide 2, really.
Yeah, it's Lowry and a bunch of role players, yeah.
Okay.
Well, a few good role players and others they're still developing.
Can I ask both of you this question? In today's NBA, how many stars and how many role players? Because you can't just have like 2 great stars and everyone else stinks. What's the right balance? How many stars and how many role players do you need to have on a roster in order to be competing for at least your conference championship? Zachariah, you first.
Man, that's an excellent question that I wish I had a little bit more time to think of. I think you look at the Celtics. How many stars do the Celtics have? Brown and Tatum off top, right? Would you call Porzingis a star or a semi-star? Their whole roster is completely loaded. They just gave a huge contract to White. I don't know if you'd call him a star, but I certainly call him something more than a role player. I mean, to answer your question, I think you need 2, maybe 2.5 superstars, and I think you need 3 guys that you could either call role players or something in between role player and star. That would be my guess for your starting 5, and then a bunch of role players on the lesser role players off the bench.
Yeah, so you said two bona fide stars, maybe 3, and then 3 role players or something in between is what you just said, right?
Yeah,
right?
no, I think you could have. I think you need 2 superstars no matter what. Then I think you need 1 guy that's in between a superstar and a role player, and then 2 really good role players, and then a bunch of just role players.
Okay, yeah,
that would be my concoction.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think you did describe the Celtics right now with that.
Yeah, look, and they're the gold standard right now, at least roster building wise in the NBA. So the reason I bring it up in this context is because we were talking about a great role player for a Utah Jazz team, and Paul Millsap was on some teams that they were playoff teams and they did some good things, right? This current Utah Jazz team is somewhat deliberately one of the worst teams in the league, but based on this roster construction model, you are potentially as many as 5 players away from really being a contender. And I think that there are some promising young pieces on this team. Like, I think Walker Kessler grows into at least like that role player, like quality role player role, for lack of
Keontae George is another one.
Keontae George is another one potentially.
And then I think mostly the rest remains to be seen.
So
depending on
you're as many as 5 players away, which means in the year 2030, after miserable half decade of tanking, we could talk about the Utah Jazz being ready to make a run in the West.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead.
I don't think they're that far off. First of all, my guy Mark Lowry can clear. You probably prefer him to be your second best player, but he could be your number 1. I think Collins is obviously coming along. I'm a huge Walker Kessler fan, so I'd be fine with him being one of those guys that's either in between star and role player or just your studly role players. And then again, it's a lot of this is going to depend on development, right? I mean, guys will jump up out of nowhere and become a superstar. I'd have to do some research, or maybe we can get our guy on that, our historian Gordy on that, to see how long these jumps take. But a lot of that's going to depend on development. I do think this question is most fascinating around one team, OC, and I think we're going to find out at some point, or by the end of the year, we'll know. But I think the best study case for this is the New York Knicks and what they did to bring in Cat, what they did to bring in Bridges, what they already had with your boy Jalen Brunson, who took less money. I think that's going to be a fascinating case on what exactly the concoction needs to be in terms of stars versus role players and whatnot.
We got to take another break here. The Zachariah Hour will continue. We'll close it out. I think Spence Checketts is going to be in the building today. We've got some trivia and prizes to give away next as the Sean O'Connell Show comes to a close. I'm Sean O'Connell. That's Zachariah. That's James Peterson, who doesn't like Klay Thompson. This is ESPN 700 and 92.1 FM, Utah's #1 sports talk.
And I think the narrative of college football right now is really screwed up. And I'm gonna kind of talk about that. It comes down to a patch, I guess, that's on your jersey. Because, stick with me, if Texas wins the SEC, that means a Big 12 team from last year won the SEC. If Oregon wins the Big 10, that means a Pac-12 team won the Big 10. And if Arizona State, now whoever's playing, but Arizona State's got a chance to play in the Big 12 championship, so that means a Pac-12 team won the Big 12. And then if SMU wins the ACC, that means an American team won the ACC. So I think it's absolutely embarrassing what this football committee and, we got to back up what we need to do on the field so they get pissed off at me. But it's absolutely embarrassing what they're doing to this conference. And if they look at it that way and they sit there and say, who's playing the best football, who's the most competitive conference, who week in and week out, what you see on tape and how, the games that you got to play, I think the Big 12 should be in. The Big 12 champion should be in the Final Four, right? And then when teams are talking about multiple teams, depending on who plays in that game, they should have multiple teams. I think it's absolutely ridiculous what is happening at that.
Welcome back to the Sean O'Connell Show. That was Joey McGuire, Texas Tech head coach, making some great points that we outlined on the show earlier today. This college football postseason has a unique feature to it that, 4 Power 4 conferences could all have champions that last year were not in their conference. And especially when you look at it through the Pac-12 lens of saying like, oh, this league's not great and you need to dissolve it and pieces will be where no one thought Arizona State was going to be a potential Big 12 champion. It was supposed to be Utah, but still it was a former Pac-12 member that the expectation was, and now it's, of course, Arizona State. So just a fascinating thing could be playing out this year in college football. Big thanks to James for finding that sound for us. Quick trivia question. 877-353-0700 is how you submit your answer on the Dish Pros text line. Lemon Shark Poke gift card. Lemon Shark Poke, delicious menu. Poke, fresh fish, great locally sourced vegetables, and, of course, that delicious sticky sushi rice. And they have hot menus as well if you're looking for something to warm up your belly in these cold weather months. It's down in the ground floor of the Judge Building right here on 300 South, just east of our Broadway studios. Arizona State, one half of that Big 12 championship matchup, has a great running back, and I mean great, in Cam Scadaboo. How many rushing touchdowns does Cam Scadaboo have this year? 877-353-0700. Hint, it is more than 3 times as many as Utah had as a team in the 2024 season. That's how impactful.
Well, now you just made it sad. Now you just made it sad for all the Utah fans listening to this show.
I'm sorry I did that. I'm sorry I did that to all of you.
Just like I made it sad for all the Warriors fans listening to this show a couple different times today.
What?
Not really. They just think that you're out of your mind.
Well, yeah, maybe not sad. Sad's not the right word. You're right, Zachariah. Incensed.
Zachariah, you're going to love this. This came in from 2470 on the Dish Pros text line. James just Eberflused himself.
Oh, just Eberflus.
See, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about, people.
Former
we got
Colts defensive coordinator, Eberflus.
I will. Years, people are using that as a word for just somebody that completely screwed something up. But I do want to get that. I mean, OC, I can't remember the last time I was that shocked watching a football game. For like not a play. It wasn't like it was some amazing play or like, like that hard hit on Trevor Lawrence. It wasn't one of those jaw drops. It was like, how dumb can you be? What am I watching? This is like a slow car accident.
I talked a lot. I probably talked more than most sports talk radio shows did about that Azeez Al-Shaair hit on Trevor Lawrence. I think 3 games is not enough. I think that you have to suspend that guy for longer. I think that was
really.
I think that was an incredibly dirty play, and I think that those types of plays, Zachariah, are what have changed the rules and changed the game of football. and made it less appealing to the old school fan, to the old school hardcore football kind of junkie. I think that exactly that play is what makes mothers not want to let their kids play football. So I think that
interesting.
I think that guy needs to get stomped out by the offensive line, and they tried to. And I think that you then need to suspend him for half the season, and of course take away the pay that comes with it.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like I know you, and then there's times like this where I'm like, maybe I don't know him as well as I think that I'm shocked. I would have thought that you would have taken the complete opposite opinion on it. I'm somewhere in the middle. He slid too late. It was obviously a bad hit, but I don't know that I would have called it a dirty hit. I don't think
it was as dirty as we've ever seen in the NFL.
I define dirty as maliciously and purposely trying to do something that is not in the rule book. I think Trevor Lawrence slid late. I think Trevor Lawrence slid late, and I think he led with his shoulder. And I think when two guys are moving that quickly against each other, it's really hard to figure out where to put your body. So I'm not even saying that I'm on his side completely, but I'm not going like you and saying it should have been more than 3 games. I probably would have done 2.
Spence Checketts is hosting The Drive, which comes up next here on ESPN 700, and he's sitting here listening to us yell at each other about it. Spence, welcome.
Is Zachariah killing my clock again? That's all I want to know.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Yeah,
we're going to take 15 full minutes of The Drive.
Every time I hear Zachariah's voice, I'm like, here we go. Half my show is gone. I'm assuming you're talking about the hit.
First of all, it's 56. It's 56.
I'm playing with you. Hey, for like months, I had to fight the narrative that I hated you, which was invented out of thin air. So now I'm just leaning into it, Zachariah.
You're going to get 2 weeks. You're going to get 2 weeks of me in person next week.
Oh, nice.
Starting next week, Spence.
Crosstalk for 30 minutes every single day. Me and Zachariah. Can't wait. I'm assuming you're talking about the hit on Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was nasty.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm with you on this one, Sean. That was dangerous.
Yeah.
That was.
And by the way, I never overreact to football hits when everyone else is wringing their hands and just like, he could have died. When it's just like, because he got an illegal block in the back. No, let's calm down. But that's one of those hits that, like, literally, my mom watches a hit like that. It's like, I'm not letting my boys play football.
How did your mom react to watching you get your head caved in by big dudes in the ring?
Never watched 1 second.
Are you serious?
My mom never saw 1 second of my fight career.
And then you just brought home $1 million check and just slammed it on the table like, what's up now, Mom?
Yeah, I was fine with her choosing not to.
Yeah,
she explained
it.
She explained it to me. She's like, I cannot stand the idea of you getting hurt. And I was like, well, I called her after one of my UFC fights that lasted 40 seconds. The guy didn't touch me. I knocked him out. It was like the cleanest fight I had. And I was just like, you can watch that one. It goes really fast.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even touch me. It's all me doing. And she's like, I don't want to watch that either. I don't want to see my baby smashing somebody else's brain. And I was like, oh, all right. That's actually
fair.
very sweet.
I'll tell you what. I mean, you and I have been friendly over the years, not super close, but I used to watch your fights nervous.
Yeah, I mean,
for you.
I've cornered plenty of my really, really good friends.
Yeah.
Like Jan Jorgensen is like a brother to me.
Yeah.
We fought together. We trained together. We lived together. Cornering his fights, I'm more nervous for that.
Yeah.
Than for my own fights. Same with DeMarcus Johnson. Same with a bunch of these guys that I came up with where you're just like, I don't want to see that guy not get hurt because I know you're not probably going to get seriously hurt, but I don't want to see them fail because I know exactly how horrible it is inside your own head when you lose a fight.
No, for sure. Yeah, I used to watch. What about Zachariah when Sean used to fight? What was that like watching his fights?
Yeah, tell me about the time you came to Long Beach to watch me fight twice in one night.
Cheering for you to get your head kicked in.
He probably was.
No. It was awful. I've told OC this a lot. I'm very squirmish. I'm even more squirmish when it's somebody that I love.
Yeah.
I used to watch his fights literally with my hands over my eyes, and I would like open up a little window to watch a little bit. And his fights were the worst, Spence, because he would get his brains beaten in for 4 rounds, and then he would knock the guy out at the end, but his eyes all purple. He's bleeding everywhere. I had a really hard time watching his fight.
Yeah, I'm very same way. Like Sean's fighting tonight, and I'd watch it like nervous.
Yeah, I mean, I never made it look easy, but at the end of the day, it all works out.
It sure did.
I need to bring Spence into this conversation.
Let's hear it.
I brought this up. Paul Millsap has officially retired, and he was a beloved, I said, role player for the Utah Jazz. On the best versions of the Utah Jazz that he was a part of, he was a high-quality, wonderful role player. He became an all-star later in his career, and maybe was an indication of some mismanagement by the Jazz. But that's not the point here. I just brought it up as, wow, what a great role player. Who's your favorite role player? You know, people came in with, I loved Jinglin' Joe. You know, everyone has their own, like, favorite role player. I want to know who your favorite role player is, and it's probably a New York Knick. And I also want to tell you that James brought his favorite role player is Klay Thompson.
Come on. Klay Thompson's not a role player. Klay Thompson's one of the 5 best shooters in the history of pro basketball.
He's got one offensive skill. That's awesome, and he's great on defense.
How many All-Star games did he make? Klay Thompson is not a role player, James, at all.
Yeah.
He was
I know, and
I've said
this multiple times because OC has liked to bring this up after I said it the first time, that I know that I'm the only one who thinks this, but yeah, I don't think that his All-Stars were necessarily deserved. I believe that he was an All-Star because he was on a great team.
At his peak, he was the best perimeter defender on the Warriors by far. They would put him on the best offensive player.
Arguably, one of the best not in the league, but
one of the best perimeter defenders out there.
Yeah.
He was a great two-way player.
I love this because, and I hope James understands I'm doing this because the novelty of it. He's not typically a hot take machine.
He's not at all.
And this is why I love it so much, because we are going to spend weeks getting to the bottom of his distaste for Klay Thompson.
See, that's the other thing about it. I never said I didn't like Klay Thompson.
Well,
I just don't think he's as good as as great as the rest of the NBA world thinks he is.
I love that take. I don't love that we're still waiting for an offensive coordinator announcement. I don't love that this is happening. I do want to know what's coming up on the drive.
Well, more of this, not role player conversation. Favorite role player of all time, Charles Oakley. We're going to talk a lot of transfer portal signing day. You know, signing day doesn't land the way it used to because of the transfer portal. There's so many opportunities ultimately to add talent. I suffered through the Jazz game last night. That might be the worst team that we've ever had here. I'm not kidding. It was horrible. Richard Smith, Zach Harper, the voice of the Utes, Bill Riley on the show today. Ali Mata, Utah Hockey Club player as well. So bounce around, do a little bit of everything, but mostly college football. We got to react to the rankings that were released last night in real time during the show, because when they're released, I'm trying to dig through the minutia, tell people what's going on, and then you kind of dig into it. We'll react to it today.
Great.
I like how you said you're not going to talk about role players very much, and then you said you're going to talk about the Jazz, which is
they're all role
a
players.
team of role players.
They're all role players. Maybe outside of market. So I had to do Talking Jazz last night on KUTV, so I forced myself to sit and watch, and they had 19 turnovers in the first half. I know it's by design, but I feel so bad for this fan base. It's so hard to watch. And OKC's really, really good, but it's going to be a long year.
Well, when you have a top 5 pick next year, it'll all not be worth it.
Knock on wood. The worst case scenario is they just have
plant the flag like all those college teams did over the weekend.
The worst case scenario is they have the worst record in the league, and the lottery balls don't go in their favor, and they get the 8th or 9th pick, even though they have 7 wins.
You droop for Coop, and you don't get him.
Yeah. It's going to be a long year, man. Droop for Coop.
Yeah.
Did you just come up with that?
We've been workshopping.
Well, that's not bad.
We've been workshopping.
That's not bad. I like
SAG
that.
for flag.
Okay. Not bad.
Lag for flag.
Not bad.
Bloopers for
drag
Cooper.
for flag.
Okay. Well,
drag.
You know what? Let's do this off air and come to a consensus about what we're going to land on.
Stay tuned for the drive. Big thanks to Zachariah and everyone else who joined us on the show today. That's enough of the Sean O'Connell Show. ESPN 700 and 92.1 FM, Utah's #1 sports talk.